Hello and welcome to All Things Foster, a place for coffee, connection, and community. We've got a really interesting guest, Lance, that we're going to get to here in just a minute. But before we do, I want to shout out to our episode sponsor. So guys, if you have a teen heading towards college, I want you to check out College Solutions, LLC in Amarillo and their lead college funding pro, Angie Grimm. College Solutions helps families navigate the college admissions and financial aid maze, handle funding strategies, scholarships, and even test prep, saving you money and stress. Angie and her team have guided hundreds of families through finding schools that fit, keeping retirement and long-term budgets intact while doing it. Want to go ahead and get get ahead now so college doesn't catch you off guard later? Visit collegesolutionsllc.com and schedule your free consultation. That's collegesolutionsllc.com. And guys, this does not just need to be in the Texas Panhandle area. She helps folks all over. So wherever you're listening, she can help you. She's a great supporter of our organization. So thanks, Angie, for your sponsorship and all that you've done for us. So today we have Lance Hillsinger with us on the podcast. Welcome, Lance. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. So let's talk a little bit. Why are you on a podcast about foster care? What is your experience with foster care?
Well, I started as a child welfare social worker in Los Angeles County, and I was there for 5 years. And at that point, the child welfare system, the juvenile court system was going through a lot of changes. There was a lot of unmet needs, very high caseloads. And I said, this system's got to be better. And so my original purpose for writing the book was just to kind of to alert people that, hey, there's this crisis going on and there's these problems.
Yeah.
Of course, between the demands of the work and then eventually having some kids and my own, I actually didn't finish the book until retirement. So I wrote the book for three main reasons. One was to inform people. There's a lot of misconceptions about the child welfare system, so this is what I want to describe. My coworkers who've read the book have said, yes, you got it right. So,
Right.
Second was to encourage people to become foster parents or guardian ad litems, because that will help the system work just that much better. And third, some various changes that I wanted to see still in the system. The system has improved over my career, but backslided in a few places, to be honest about it.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so I want to make sure that people understand that it's a never-ending process to make the system work better.
Absolutely. So how long were you involved in the system?
Well, I was with LA County for 5 years, and then for 29 years with San Luis Obispo County. And San Luis Obispo County is just north of Santa Barbara.
So 34 years. What was what were you in the same role that whole time, type of role? Were you in investigations and then, caseworker and stuff like that? Or what did you kind of hold the same, kind of do the same thing?
For the first year, I did emergency response. So that's when someone calls on the hotline and social worker goes out to investigate, sometimes with the police, sometimes not.
Yeah.
I did that for a year. I did not particularly like that job, that particular
Sure.
assignment. An opening in what we call the court unit, what we colloquially call the court unit, though that's not an official designation, to do the court investigation between when kids have entered protective custody, when they've gone into foster care, file the initial court paperwork, and take it through disposition where the child's declared dependent of the juvenile court. Just for people to know, ward is for when a child commits a crime. Dependent is when a child has been abused or neglected.
And so you were ensuring that, so the kiddos, you spent a year doing the investigation emergency part, then you spent the rest of the time ensuring that kiddos, as they're kind of navigating the court system, that's where you were at.
Well, I did. That's where I initially went back. Then they changed offices, so then I did case management. So I sort of had a split caseload for a little while. And then, lo and behold, my wife and I decided, my parents were retiring up to San Luis Obispo. We went up here and bought a house unbuilt. We crossed our fingers to get jobs, and fortunately both of us did. And then I was a court investigator for probably over 20 years with San Luis Obispo County. And then times changed, and I became what we call an ongoing worker, which is after the child's been declared independent of the court. Most of the kids are in foster care at times, but some were under court supervision.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did that. I've never did adoptions, but I've referred many people to adoptions. San Luis Obispo is a small county.
Yeah.
So of course I would get to know the adoption workers, the other ER workers, other people.
Absolutely. So, do you know how many cases approximately? How many cases you worked on or were a part of?
Well, I filed over 600 petitions with the court. I figured it out and unlike most states in California, the social worker files the petition. The legal document says, "Judge, this child needs protection in juvenile court. We need to do something here." In most states, the social worker files an affidavit or similar declaration, and then an assistant state attorney general will file the actual documents. We have,
that's
of
how it
course,
is in Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is in most states. The head county council would review our petitions, and sometimes they had problems, they had issues or something. They wanted something clarified. But after a while, you got the knack of it, and they would be filed, and then you'd have the detention hearing, then the jurisdiction hearing, which is what are the facts, and then the dispositional hearing. What are we going to do? In practice, the jurisdictional disposition hearings would be held at the same time. Most of the time, about 80% of the time.
Yeah. Wow. So that's not 600 kids. That's 600 cases, right?
Right.
So
right.
which, correct me if I'm wrong, but many of those are going to be more than one kiddo.
Yeah, you figure some 3-kid cases, some single-kid cases, so maybe 1,200 children, somewhere in there.
Wow. So what got you into this? Where did the impetus come from for that?
I love to tell the story. I got my master's degree in psychology from Vanderbilt University, and I was on a PhD track, and then I realized academia was not for me. That was not where I was destined to go. I returned back to my native California, got a job working with dual diagnosis, people who are developmentally disabled and have a mental health diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it was a sort of a sheltered workshop setting. And we worked with a partnership. I was like the senior partner, and then I had a junior partner. And because that junior partner, I wasn't paid very much. The junior partner was paid very little, not much more than minimum wage. There was a lot of turnover. So anyways, one day I got paired with a woman, and there's that just, you run into these people that you say green and they say blue, you just don't, we just did not get along. And, I was the supervisor technically, so I figured, hey, you could kind of have to. One day though, she said, why don't we try to get so-and-so a job as a dishwasher in a county cafeteria? And I was about to say, that's a really bad idea. Then I realized that's a really good idea.
Right.
That's a really good idea. Yeah. So we make it a little field trip, and this is in the pre-internet days. We go down to the Hall of Administration, downtown LA, look at this huge listing that has everything from arborist to zoologist. And fortunately, children's services worker came before county dishwasher, and that's how I learned that I got the job.
Wow. That's crazy. And so what does it mean to file a case?
Well, that means you're filing a document that says that the legal system needs to intervene. And the initial hearing and detention hearing is similar to an arraignment hearing in criminal court. You have to cite which code sections you think apply. In California, 300A is sort of your generic physical abuse. 300B of the Welfare Institution Code is neglect. So on D is sexual abuse. Some of the code sections aren't used very often, so that's why they don't always go in alphabetical order. Sure. D is sexual abuse. G is parents not available. So,
And so you were the one filing the case with the court, not like removing or overseeing the placements. Is that right? Or were you overseeing the kiddos that you filed their paperwork for?
It's logistically very difficult if you're an emergency response worker and you don't know if you're going to go out and knock on a door and you're going to be nobody's home, or you're going to take the kid in foster care and you're going to be taught, be involved with that particular family for the next several hours. So it's very hard for those people to be in court at a certain time. So the system divides it between emergency response people. Well, why are there all these different social workers? Because it's just a matter of practicality.
Right. Yeah.
So I would be more available. I would do ongoing investigations. What's the story, the background? Okay, mom was arrested on drugs. Where's dad? And then we have to find dad. And is mom's drug use, is it a sporadic thing or is it really a chronic thing? And does she have family? Does he have family? And do more thorough investigation of the whole totality of the circumstances.
Wow.
And then, present that. You present the detention report, which is you are asking, the judge only has to make a prima facie case, that the particular subsections apply. And then you have the jurisdiction hearing where you need the preponderance of evidence. The more evidence, yes, but under California law, you have to have clear and convincing evidence, a little bit higher legal standard. So you could say, yes, this abuse occurred, but we're still going to leave the child in the home because there's not clear and convincing evidence. Maybe it's a one-off kind of situation, and you don't need to put the kid in foster care. And so you can have that as a result. But I want to stress that roughly 2/3 of our cases were neglect due to substance abuse.
Right.
With probably domestic violence being the next most common reason. Now, of course, you can have domestic violence and substance abuse and physical abuse and parent unavailable and all this. You can have multiple reasons. And under California code, there was 300E, which was severe physical abuse of a child under 5. So if you really brutalized a young child, there was a special provision in the code where you might not get reunification, that parent might not get reunification. Generic physical abuse of 300A, which was very rare. I would file what I would call a pure 300A case only once every couple of years. And usually they were more mental health cases or domestic violence, or as I said, substance abuse and neglect. Right. Or parents just not available. One of the situations, we have this image of brutalized children. Most of them are not. They may be traumatized in other ways. But a very common scenario is the mom leaves the kids with her mother and then just doesn't come back, and grandma calls and says, I need something, I need help. So nobody's been abused, but the child doesn't have a parent. Now that's a common scenario, there are of course many.
Yeah, sure. So what do you said that there's kind of some misconceptions around Child Protective Services. What's something that you think people misunderstand about the system? Well,
I think one of the things is that the federal government recognizes that we kind of want equality. We want every child to protect it. So if the child comes from a poor home, the federal government will pay the bulk of the foster care expenses. Okay. And so that has been distorted into, CPS gets paid for us to remove kids. That's how it gets distorted.
Right.
And this is, if I could just digress a bit, roughly 90% of the families in San Luis Obispo County, which is a fairly affluent county, were poor enough to qualify for court-appointed lawyer. Not quite the same standard as federal, but very close. In some states, the parents do not get a court-appointed lawyer if their kids have been taken. They have to represent themselves.
Wow.
And so that's my bucket. So that's one of the things I want to point out. So I think that the financial thing is the big misconception.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah, I was in foster care. I was adopted, and when I connected with my biological mom later, she was like, "Those CPS workers get a bonus every time they place a child in care," and I'm like, "No, they don't."
No, we don't. No, we don't. And I would parents would say to me, "You just want to take my kid." I says, "You don't know how hard I have to work when I take your kid. If I don't take your kid, I don't work as hard."
Right. We're not.
So
we're not
that usually satisfied people.
Yeah. Yeah. It boggles my mind that they tell themselves these stories really to kind of make them not culpable. They don't want to accept responsibility for this happening. It just So.
And I think there's also the misconceptions. Maybe it's a holdover from a long time ago, but I think it still lingers that foster parents are in for the money.
Yeah.
because we do recognize that teens are more expensive than kids and than school-age kids, so they pay more. But the cost of childcare is horrendous, and kids are expensive. And as I talk in my second book, Build a Better Bridge, Social Policy for the 21st Century, is that, everybody has bills. Foster parents have bills. Housing is extremely expensive in San Luis Obispo. We are like on par. If you take salaries and cost of home, we're on par with San Francisco.
Wow.
So you obviously have to pay foster parents a decent amount of money if they're going to take the time away from being employed to be a foster parent.
Right.
And it is more, parenting is time intensive, and foster parenting even more so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in Texas, they're still coming up with some money out of their own pocket. The money from CPS it's not enough to like make a living at, I mean, it's enough to offset the majority of the expense of having the kiddos in your home. They're not, they ain't getting rich being a foster parent.
Oh, no. And so was talking with a social worker, or was on a podcast with the UK, and they're much more generous than they are. They're very much more generous. And one of the things that historically happened in California is that foster parents were not getting raised for, the foster parent reimbursement was not raised for many years of trying to save budgets or whatever. And so kids were going into expensive group homes because of the shortage. And it was much more expensive to place a child in a group home. And suddenly the legislatures, maybe if we paid foster parents more, fewer kids would go into group homes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's a huge lawsuit in Texas around group homes, and so like in Texas, you can't have a group home unless more than 6 kiddos in the home total, unless there's a staff member awake 24 hours, 7 days a week. And so they made it much more complicated. Just your typical average foster family cannot go beyond 6 total kids at any given time. And so
we can go beyond 6 if they're related, and then it's max of 8.
Right.
And well, actually, one of my cases helped set that it was tangentially related to help set that rule that we made in San Luis Obispo County was later adopted statewide.
Wow.
But one of the things that I learned is that there are for-profit group homes. In California, you can't place a kid in a profit group home. And I thought that was a federal law, but it's actually a state rule. And so I think there's been a lot about where there have been for-profit group homes. And yes, that's I had placed kids in good group homes, and there's some kids that is a part of the system that we need. I think there's people who it's just some kids that's the structure that they need and the help that they need, and it's a practicality. If you're not hiring foster parents, you're going to have to place these kids in a group home or let them. We're talking mostly about teens. Let their behavior get worse, and they wind up being wards of the court because they just find a gang life to adopt or something. Yeah.
Right. What was the kind of the emotional weight of filing your first case? I mean, was it, just like, oh my gosh, this is heavy, or was it kind of maybe a relief saying, oh my gosh, this kid, it was in a hellacious situation and we're helping them be safe? What was that like?
I don't really remember filing my first case. The first time I put a kid in protective custody was very stressful and very, back then, actually, we didn't put them in protective custody. They were put in custody of law enforcement. Law enforcement released the child to me, the children, they were twins. And just doing the mechanics of everything, just taking 2 newborn twins to a foster home, to an unfamiliar location in LA traffic, was a very stressful moment. And then the interview with the mom was actually kind of not that stressful, less stressful than I expected. Yeah. I feel good about the cases that I filed and felt like it was justified. So, yes, I take pride in my job, but people say, but again, I do think that things were better most of the time, or I should say,
Sure.
the system isn't perfect, but I think the end result was more often good than we left the situation better.
Right. Well, and that's there's this, thought process that, that the system itself is just, growing these kids when in reality, I mean, it's, number one, it's generational, the likelihood of your kids being in care, if you were in care, is much higher. But then the cycle of abuse continues and things like that. And so, like, there's always room for improvement, but I mean, these caseworkers are not out trying to just ruin these kids' lives. They're trying to help, So it's just tough.
Yeah. When I left LA County, I had 77 children in my caseload. And then that was just, you're supposed to see every child every once a month. There's some
Right.
exceptions back then. And that was just unrealistic. And I think sometimes things when they have caseloads are that high, bad things are more likely to happen.
Right. Well, Texas has a balanced budget amendment. And so during the during the housing market collapse, and we had these babies, we had 4 caseworkers that year, and our 4th caseworker, we were her 54th case, not counting kids, but 54 separate cases. And yeah, how in the world are you supposed to do a home visit with every single kiddo? Because, some of them are placed together, but a lot of them are not, because there's not space,
That's one of the reasons why people talk about how the system should be pro-parent or pro-child, or this. I think the way the system will work better is if there's more foster parents.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a social worker driving 10 minutes, it's a lot better, a lot more efficient system than if they have to drive 50 minutes to a foster home.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just definitely, I don't know the numbers across the state or across the country. I know Texas's numbers pretty well, and there's nowhere near enough homes in Texas. I saw a study that said that there was like something like 400,000 kiddos in foster care in the U.S. And so it's just crazy.
Just to make a point about that, when I started with San Luis Obispo County, we had 15 emergency beds that we could do. Now, for people who are listening to the podcast, not familiar with the foster care system, there's some foster parents that want to be long-term, but there's also a group of people who are short-term, people who would call at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, child's on the way, and they are contractually obligated to take the child. So we had 15 beds, including a group home that we shared with probation. Time with San Luis Obispo County, the population increased by about 50% in the county. When I left, we had about 8 emergency homes.
Oh, geez.
So half the number of homes, 50% more people. So you can imagine the stress that just adds to the system.
Absolutely. And what kind of kept you going? I mean, this is tough, heavy, emotional work. What kind of kept you going for 34 years doing this? Because most caseworkers, they're not lasting almost 3.5 decades.
Yeah. Well, I had my days, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
In LA County, my caseload was so high that at any given time, few people were doing good, a couple were doing bad, most were doing so-so. Mm-hmm. Okay, so over time, but when my caseload was much smaller in San Luis Obispo County, especially as a court worker, some days everybody in the caseload was having a tough day, or so that was the tough thing. And when I just realized that there's just sort of you're randomly going to have those days that are just one crisis after another, then you're going to have some really good days where everybody's going to their treatment programs, everybody's going to their visits, you're having no contested hearings that month. And you just have to accept that there's just sort of a random chance in the universe there. And I also liked the work. I think that the working in a smaller county was working with the same attorneys,
Yeah.
that was very good. And we only had one judge, so at any one time they would rotate. We would usually get a new
Sure.
judge every six years.
Right.
But at least you would have consistency about that, and so I liked that. And fortunately, I was fortunate for most of the time, lived close enough to work too. That was another thing to help. I didn't have a really long commute, but on those days when I would be in one part of the county and then have a late night and then coming back late, and okay, coming home at 7:30. Hey, Dad, kids need to go to bed at 8 for school the next day. It's tough.
Yeah, for sure. So what do you wish foster parents knew from a caseworker's perspective?
My experience is that over time, we did a better job of educating foster parents about the system. I think initially it was all about, you get your fingerprints and what your house looked like, and, do you have a prior criminal record, and, that kind of stuff, and focusing on that. But I think as part of the classes that foster parents have to take, I think that's one of the things that people are unaware of, that foster parents have to take classes and be recertified. And same with relatives. Relatives are required in California. I see the wisdom of that, but I also see that it could be unconstitutional, to be honest.
Right.
But to learn to be in foster care, learn to be a relative caretaker, I think that they understand that. One of the things that as a court worker, I would tell people, we don't want to do this over again. One of the most difficult times is if you provide services, you provide reunification, but you didn't do a very good job of it. The appellate court can say, we want a do-over. Because if you didn't provide the parents with their legally entitled services,
Right.
the appellate court can order a do-over. Now, I never had that happen in one of my cases. I took over a few cases that someone left or whatever or was transferred from another county, and they're one of the type very difficult cases to work in. You do not want a do-over. So when people say, "Oh, why do we have to have these? Why can't we just move on with the legal system? Why can't I just adopt the child?" We don't want a do-over.
Yeah.
And that's why one of the things that they are so strict about in California now is Native American ancestry.
Oh yeah.
If there's anything that remotely there could be Native ancestry, we have to search that through the tribes. And sometimes people, if mom belongs to or thinks she belongs to the Apache or maybe the Cherokee, and dad thinks it's the Iroquois, you're not talking 3 tribes, you're talking like 15, because there's several Apaches, there are multiple. And a practical matter, it doesn't change anything. I had only 2 cases in my history where the child was an Indian, what we call an ICWA child, Indian Child Welfare Act child. And the sequence of events was not changed because the child was Indian. The same things would have happened had that child not had Native American ancestry. The outcome would have been the same, but it was just a lot of procedures. So that's my bugaboo, is I wish that the Supreme Court recently made a ruling on that there was special rules, what they call active efforts to place the child in an Indian home, and they've said, yes, you've got to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about your book. What you said, you started writing it when you were a caseworker, and then it ended up, finishing it at retirement, but you had some recommendations, right? Some thought processes and ways to make the system a little bit better.
Right. One of them is the ICWA law, that has just outlived its usefulness.
What is it?
The ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act.
Oh, okay.
I think it has outlived its usefulness. Back in the olden days, several hundred children were taken simply because they were Native American. In the early 1900s, late 1800s, there was the orphan trains. Tens of thousands of largely white children were taken without any judicial oversight.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that as a comparison. I think it's an insult to the profession of social work that somehow we would be prone to remove an Indian child simply because of their ethnicity. That's really offensive to the profession of social work.
Yeah.
And I think every hour that we spent complying with ICWA is an hour not spent helping somebody in their substance use program, or getting the transportation, or the other hundreds of little things, other things that social workers do. And so there's a penalty. ICWA is a penalty that keeps social workers from spending time doing something that's really more genuine social.
Mm-hmm. So are there others that you, like, looking back, you're like, man, we should be doing it this way, but we're doing it that way?
My is more like we're doing too much paperwork.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As I say, I spend more and more screen time and less of that real face time with people.
Right.
And there was lots of forms about, is the child, do you suspect the child is a victim of sexual exploitation? To go through every child over the age of 10 in your caseload, to fill out all those forms on what would be a common sense. You probably know if this kid's been exhibiting sexualized behavior, you're probably suspicious. You don't really need the paperwork to make that common sense, that any judgment, that any reasonable parent or person, I should say, would say, okay, this is kids, maybe something's going on here. And so again, an hour wasted doing silly paperwork is an hour not doing actual social work.
Right. Well, I mean, the paperwork on the foster parent side is obscene. Kiddo gets a scraped knee and we have to fill out a form. We have to give them Benadryl because they have allergies, or they had a headache. I gotta give them some Motrin. You gotta fill out a form. And that's just one example of paperwork that the foster parent has to do, and then that has to be reviewed by the caseworker, and so on and so forth. It's just like obscene, the amount of paperwork that's required on a consistent basis just to make things the way that they're supposed to be. It's just crazy.
Yeah, the number of forms that we had to complete when we're placing a child in a foster home was just what to take 45 minutes, an hour to go through everything,
right. Yeah. I mean, sign here, initial here, sign here, sign here.
And we tried to get the system where, like, the name and the birthday would be pre-populating the forms. Even that was a struggle to get that. So,
yeah, just the paperwork is absolutely ridiculous. I just can't even imagine on the caseworker side the amount of stuff that you have to deal with. Man, it's just so. Where do you think the system is broken and could be very much improved?
Well, like I said, I think it has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, again, we also have what we call structured decision making. In California, you have to fill out a form. You have to say why the child, is the perpetrator still have access to the child? Yes, no. And again, most of that is just common sense, logical things. And if you don't have that logical sense, you probably should be a social worker, And, a meeting with the supervisor, is your SDM complete? Not like, how's the Smith case going? It's, is your SDM complete? And that kind of thing. And that's the one thing that I think that is very discouraging. People come out of graduate school, they're going to help the world, they're going to, and then they realize here's a lot of paperwork. And I think that part of it is management. I mean, management at the local level doesn't have much control of state mandated paperwork.
For sure.
But if you lend an empathetic ear, then people will stay. But like any job, it's important to experience helps. You don't want to turn over. I think one of the things that is really hard on kids if they keep getting a new social worker.
Oh, yeah.
They're in foster care, and gee, am I going home? But am I getting a new social worker? Nobody cares about me. It's like like when you were in school, you got a substitute teacher. You kind of like, oh, maybe I'll act up, or maybe I'll, or
Right.
I don't have to work so hard. I'm going to get a new substitute next week, and so you're not as invested in the school day, and so I think that's also true with kids. With their social workers changing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, that 1 year we had 4 caseworkers that just in that with those kids in that 1 year. I mean, and so they're the learning how do you have any kind of continuity of plan of what's going on when, we're just constantly chasing your tail with all the different, with the constant new caseworker. And then, and then to that, I mean, they got a master's degree, and then, the number of hours that they're working, I mean, they're not even making minimum wage, at least in Texas.
Yeah, and for any bureaucrats that are watching, any people in government that have the power, you might be reluctant to pay, but you don't buy the cheapest car on the lot.
Yeah.
You may be okay. You're not going to pay the social workers, BMW rates, but pay them a decent rate. Pay them because you'll have and it's supply and demand. As I write in my book, I come from a family of lawyers. My dad was a family lawyer. My uncle was a corporate lawyer, made lots of money.
Yeah.
I was very tempted at one point to just quit saying, hey, as much as I love this job, I'd like a better paycheck.
Yeah.
And
sure.
if you don't give the social worker a better paycheck, they're going to move on to something else. One of my buddies is now a chauffeur. He makes a lot of money and he has less stress.
No doubt.
He does it, yeah.
So in that, what kept you going?
I like the joy of it. Like I said, I came from a family lawyer, so I really like the legal aspect of it. I think there's a real, for lack of a better, moral question. When does the state have the right to take somebody's kids? And I was fascinated by that. And also at one point, there was no other options. In Smithfield County, we have agriculture and tourism are two biggest industries. There wasn't any place for me to take my experience that would pay decently. And I just like to tell this real quick story. One day I was feeling kind of down, and I thought, well, let's see if they're hiring in Kentucky. I don't know. In the entire state system of Kentucky, they were only hiring one job. There was one job vacancy for a plumber in the entire system of Kentucky.
Oh,
not just social work. I mean, the entire state government. So I thought, okay, I better just accept where I job here.
Wow, that's crazy. So, you were exposed to a whole lot of trauma, right? How did you manage those emotions? That I mean, I know when we did a placement package, we did placement packages for kiddos coming into foster care. And so, we did a placement package last week for a little girl, and, she was 4 months old. She had just finished her third brain surgery. She's got 2 broken femurs, and my experience with it is, this much, as far as the families and stuff that we're interacting with. I'm not overseeing this family for, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever. I see them when we deliver the placement package, So what did you do with all of that?
Well, the really serious cases from a social worker viewpoint are relatively easy. You have a police report, you have a medical report. From a court worker report, one case I remember with the shaken baby. And yes, very serious injuries and everything. But getting the backstory to that and finding out that this dad, he did a bad thing that day, but was a decent guy every other day in his life.
Yeah.
And wanting to see that. So that was a good case in the sense that, I mean, we were good, would have been never having been abused, but as far as it didn't traumatize me because I saw this family actually getting better from this horrendous thing.
Right.
I think that the cases that would frustrate me would be when people would relapse on drugs, and they were doing well. One of the things that happened towards the end of my career, I had this case where the 2 kids, there were 2 like preschool age kids. Mom had a long history of drug use, and she got the kids back after being in treatment for a while. She was testing clean, and I felt like I had no legal recourse but to dismiss the case. I didn't have a reason for the government to stay involved in this person's life. One of the attorneys said, I am not so sure about this, Lance. I said, maybe you're right, but I can't, I don't have it from a legal vehicle. And sure enough, we dismissed the case. I think we did hang it on for like another month to see. We hung it on for another month to continue it for something. And then sure enough, 2 months later, the mom relapsed and the kids went back into treatment.
Yeah.
So those are the heartbreaking ones.
No, absolutely.
When people relapse.
Yeah. They measure recidivism. I don't know if they do there, but I probably do. But in Texas, in the area that we serve in Texas, the recidivism rate is 45% within 5 years. So if they go back to the biological family, there's a 45% chance that they're going to be back in care within 5 years, right? And that's not doing it.
That's horrendous. This is one of the things that I want to educate about. The federal government sets certain performance standards to the states.
Yeah.
One of those is for every 1,000 children abused or neglected, how many are abused and neglected again within an 18-month period or whatever that is.
Right.
And you of course, you'd like that number to be zero,
Sure.
but it's not going to be zero. But how close to zero are you getting?
Right.
And the scorecards, there's other measures about children, how many days do they stay in foster care before termination of parental rights or adoption, blah, blah, blah. There's several of these measures, but these states are given a scorecard. And so I think that is something that I think that people don't know about and that from the administrators pay attention to, because ultimately the federal government can say, well, we won't give you any money. Of course, if the system is broken, you're not doing a very good job, you're going to do a really lousy job, you get less money, but they're supposed to submit a corrective action plan if something is so.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I look at these statistics, I mean, and then in our part of the world, you talk about you served a county. So most of the kiddos were removed from your county and placed in your county. Right?
Most, yes. So, we would place with relatives, of course, in another county or sometimes another state. But most were either relative or foster care placements in the county. So
our numbers right now, of course, we cover the 26 counties of the Panhandle. So that's the size of West Virginia. That's a big area that we served. 22% of the kiddos removed stay in the county that they're from, in the 26 counties.
That's very low.
Yeah, it's awful. There's not enough, obviously we have some really small towns that, the county seat has, 1,500 people in it, and they don't have any licensed homes or whatever. But just as a whole in the 26 counties, 22% stay, and I try to explain it to people that it's kind of like dropping a kiddo it's kind of like you being dropped in the middle of the Amazon jungle naked, right? Nothing is familiar. Nothing's safe. I don't know these people, things have been hellacious, but they were my normal, right? And so now I'm not going to the same school. I don't have the same friends. I don't have this. Nothing is familiar for these kiddos.
And I think that's a challenge for foster parents. They have a nice home, back, and then why isn't the child grateful? Well,
right.
They don't have it's all the surprise and all the things. This is one of the things that I think the system has improved. We have what we call an educational liaison. So when a child enters foster care, there's supposed to be coordination from the child's former school to the child's current school, especially if it's in different school districts, which would happen in your case a lot.
Yeah.
We were supposed to try to keep the child in the same school, but on a practical basis, we have, it's very expensive, as I said, to live in the county, but the two lesser expensive are the extreme ends. So if you have a child living in Napoma, which is in the south end, foster care in Paso Robles, you're not going to physically be able to take the child to the same school. It's just going to, the kid would be on the road all day long.
Yeah.
So, that was one of the things where, okay, let's look at things practical, but you try to make some continuity here, and it is tough. I remember when I was in fifth grade, my parents moved. I was in a new school. Nothing, no abuse, no neglect.
Yeah,
We just moved
sure.
to a nice. We moved to a nice house. Uh, that was a
But it's still
big surprise. It
disconcerting
was
for
an
a little
adjustment.
bit. Yeah. 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 Because nothing's the same. Nothing's familiar. Nothing's safe. Nothing's safe. And so, that's what, they've done so much research around, helping kiddos heal and understanding felt safety, and the fact that just because you're physically safe right now does not mean that you feel safe, right? And so there's foster parents out there that I don't understand. They're safe. Nothing's happening. They have food to eat. They have clothes to wear. They have this. They have that. And stuff like that. But the kids don't feel safe because everything's new. Everything's scary. Nothing. The smell in the apartment or the house is different. The food tastes different. Everything is different. And so they don't feel safe, even though they are safe, because everything's new, and that, that can go on for a heck of a long time. I mean, it's not like, okay, you've been here a month, you should feel safe by now. And it's not the way it works.
In the notes you sent me, I said, what case got to you, or what was the case? When you were talking, you reminded me of this case where I had some tangential contact with the grandmother in the case from another case.
Yeah.
So I got assigned the case. The child had been raised by the grandmother because both parents were in prison. Grandmother had some pretty serious mental health problems and wound up being hospitalized for those problems. And so the child went in foster care. Nice upper middle class foster homes. And the child, was just, the foster parent would just open the pantry and the kid would just be big-eyed, wow, and even days after, he was just wolfing down food just because it had been inconsistent in his life. But then as he realized, okay, I'm going to get fed every way, I don't have to worry about this, he also started realizing that Grandma and I couldn't track down where Grandma went to, she was hospitalized somewhere, nobody, I couldn't find out how.
Wow.
I couldn't find out where, and we couldn't find the parents. And the kids started saying, I'm mad at the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mad because I don't have anybody. I don't have anything that's familiar. I don't even like Grandma, even though she was, kind of crazy. I had her. She was loving as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
It was probably not like I'm depriving the child of food. It's probably she just didn't have the money.
Yeah.
Because she was in a very poor, very modest apartment. And we eventually had to place the child in a group home, and that really hurt and the foster parents felt guilty that they couldn't manage the child, and I felt the kid was mad at me. And then what do? I go to San Luis Obispo. This was a case in L.A. County. So what do? I abandoned the kid too.
Yeah.
And I felt really bad.
Yeah. I was talking to a caseworker. You guys have CASA there, right? Court Appointed Special Advocates. So there was a caseworker, and she'd been a caseworker for a long time, but she left the agency that she was with to go work at CASA. And the reason she did was she was placing a kiddo, she was moving a kiddo from one home to somewhere else. And so the kid was 15, and he'd been in care since he was 5. And so she's going through, he's got a cell phone, and she's like, okay, I need to check all the phone numbers that you want to have access to, people you want to call, and he writes down one person. She's like, well, who's that? And that's my CASA. And it'd been his CASA for 10 years. This was, in the Panhandle, and the CASA was from Houston. But the kid didn't even know where he was born. And he'd bounced around so stinking much. So she, she ended up going to CASA to work just because those advocates, they can be a piece of continuity when everything is chaotic.
Now, are you the cost of workers paid in your area?
Well, so they have a few staff, like 4 or 5 staff, that run 7 counties, and then all the cost of advocates are volunteers. But yeah, they had a few staff.
We have the supervisors are paid. There's
Right.
an office. There's clerical support. There's but beyond that, the ongoing person who's just a volunteer. Yeah.
Yeah. The actual advocates are volunteer, and so, but yeah, so she realized. I mean, she's got a front row seat to the impact that this CASA worker had on this young man, and so yeah, she stopped working as a caseworker and went to go work at CASA because it was, it was such an important role, in that kiddo's life. Yeah.
And people wonder, well, why does the social worker keep the case, or why do they want one? Is there's turnover, there's burnout, and 2, people get promoted or they transfer another office because they bought a new home in the other area, and
right.
they don't want to commute an hour.
Yeah.
So there's reasons that have nothing to do with the child or the case that are just ordinary reasons that people change jobs.
Yeah. It's not. I mean, the caseworkers that I've known, they they'll work for a licensing agency, and then they'll go to a different agency or whatever, just for various reasons, and it's on the one hand, you want the kiddos to have the same worker as much as possible. We don't want to switch caseworkers just to switch caseworkers, but you want to try to keep them the same as much as possible. There's gonna be turnover. There's gonna be job changes and career moves and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Did you have like a mentor that really kind of impacted your work?
Not really. I had 3 or 4 different supervisors in LA County. I had one supervisor, same supervisor for about 10 years in San Luis Obispo County. I wouldn't call it a mentor. They was a straight supervisor. Wasn't anything. I think county council was very helpful sometimes. Sometimes that they would say something. They would say, I'd go with this petition. I'd say this thing that says, Lance, lead with the most important fact. And also that helped me write clearer. Mm. And because the judge is looking at 20 cases, you don't want to get into, not that they're stupid or whatever, but you need to say it in a really clear term, almost like a writing. And I mentioned like a good newspaper article.
Right.
What are the facts? And let me know this, and then what's the conclusion here? And write it like that. And I think that's one of the struggles that some social workers have as a court system. You have to write in this system that is legalistic, and you have to tie this to that, and make as opposed to some sort of. I had one social worker come to me. Look at this child, the drawing this child made. Isn't this important? I thought, that's not going to hold up in court. It's not. Or you have to be testified as a therapist, as an expert in art therapy, and I'm going, no. But did the child say, the boyfriend's a bad guy? No. So.
Wow. So with the book, well, let's just where do folks find it?
It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other major booksellers. In Place of the Parent, Inside Child Protective Services.
Okay, and we'll put links to that in the show notes and stuff, so folks can find it. Do you have anything you feel like you'd like to say to foster and adoptive families, or to other organizations out there that that we haven't touched on?
Well, I just want to express my appreciation to foster parents. To borrow the Peace Corps expression, the toughest job you ever love. That's the Peace Corps slogan.
Yeah,
and I think that's very true for foster parents. I know some of them socially, and I think that they're just like anything, but the people are scared. Oh, they're people are in it for the money, or there's a bad apples in any
Yeah.
group of people, but the
Yeah.
first percentage of angels is very high
Yeah.
in foster parents, and the bad apples are very, very, very few
Yeah.
in between. So kudos to anyone who's being a foster parent out there.
Yeah.
So, and then just a little, if I may, I have a website, lancehillsinger.net.
Okay.
There's my other books there. One of the things I found is that very few of my families had any connection to organized religion, and some found faith, and that was helpful in their recovery and establishing it in life. I write about some of those stories in the book. But my latest book to draw people to faith is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, A Court Investigator Examines the Gospels. Majority of people today, for the first time, like since about 2020, are not attached to any organized religion. You go back, and I draw this very quickly. I know you want to wind things up. During the pandemic of 1917, the flu pandemic, suicide rates the year before that pandemic was half of the year before COVID. Our suicide rates are actually double what they are historically. And one of the reasons is that people are not attached. They're not attached to a religion. They're not attached to their neighbors. There's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that I think that people are less connected to God.
Absolutely.
And so that was my purpose in bringing the book and coming through a different angle, because a lot of people don't like the knocking on the doors or the what I would call the hard sell about religion. That turns a lot of people off. And this is very much a soft sell.
It kind of sounds reminiscent. I don't know if you've seen Lee Strobel's book, A Case for Christ. It sounds kind of like that. That would be something similar.
I've heard of it. I have not read it.
Yeah, it's he was a hardcore atheist, and then he set out to prove Christianity false, and then ended up proving that it was real.
Good for him. Good for him. Good.
So very cool. That's cool. So lancehillsinger.net. And again, we'll put links down in the show notes for folks to find it. Man, I appreciate 34 years in that environment. I have had experience with lots of caseworkers over the last 12 years longer, and I know very, very few that that made it 5 or 10 years, and so 34 years serving broken people and kiddos coming in horrible situations. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, I do. I want to say thank you. I mean, just wow.
Well, I had a lot of help along the way, and I think San Luis Obispo was a better place than other places. There's some challenges that are unique to our county, but it was my pleasure to do it. I thoroughly enjoyed it, though it had its days, and I was just thrilled that this was what I felt. This is talking a little bit about religion. I just felt that this was my calling.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So.
Well, again, thanks, Lance, for coming on. Again, it's lancehillsinger.net. We'll put links to the books and his website down in the notes below. So if you want to connect with him, you can do it that way. Guys, thanks for tuning in. We want to have stories on here that some of them are real hard, tough stories, and some are, filled with hope and things like that. But resources that are out there for foster and adoptive families, and for the community to say, "Oh my gosh, this is what foster care is all about." And so, like, share, subscribe to the episode wherever you're streaming it from. We want more and more people to see what we're doing here, see what foster parents go through, get some community built around foster and adoptive families. So, guys, if you want, go to my website, panhandleorphan.org. You can set up a monthly donation, $100 a month, buys us all the clothes we need for a placement package. $50 buys us a case of diapers, and $10 buys us an outfit. And we are giving out so many placement packages to families as they bring kiddos in, and we're helping them feel connected and valued and loved. And so if you're interested, go to our website, panhandleorphan.org, and check that out. Angie, thanks again for your sponsorship for this episode. If you got kids that are getting ready to go to college or thinking about it, middle school, great time to look into it. Go to collegesolutionsllc.com. Thanks, you guys, and have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Matt.